Hola, ¿qué tal? Bienvenidos al primer episodio de El Empoderamiento Importa, donde vamos a ver un poco conversaciones sobre temas legales y culturales de todo tipo para empoderar a la comunidad. Mi nombre es Santiago Cortés Alcocer, soy el encargado de los asuntos políticos y culturales de la Embajada de México aquí en Australia. Y ahora voy a cambiar un poco a inglés porque tenemos una invitada muy importante, así que vamos a cambiar al inglés. We are joined by Debra Parker, founding director of Parker Coles Curtis, a family law firm specializing in domestic violence cases here in Canberra. Debra, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Santiago. Thank you for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about a very important subject, that is domestic violence. And to start with, tell us about how can we understand what is domestic violence, how can we recognize it, and what are the different forms of domestic violence?
Yeah. Well, traditionally in Australia, the term domestic violence was used for any form of violence or threatening behaviour between a husband and a wife, or a partner and the ex-partner or ex-husband, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last decade or so, that definition has been expanded to family violence. So we now talk about family violence. And family violence can be violence within the family involving other members of the family, for example, grandparents or stepchildren or adopted children, not just the husband and wife and partner and ex-partner. And it's any form of behaviour that causes the other person, the victim, to feel threatened or to fear for their personal safety, or behaviour that controls them or coerces them, forces them to do something. So the legislation in Australia has quite wide definitions now.
Mm-hmm.
It's much wider than it used to be when we spoke only of domestic violence between husband and wife.
Or partner and partner.
Exactly, or a partner and a partner, that's right. So the behaviour that can constitute family violence can be, the obvious things like a physical assault, causing bruises or injuries, or sexual assault. But it can also be the more nuanced form of control, like depriving someone of finances, not letting them have money to go and buy the essentials, or depriving them of their liberty in the home, isolating them from members of their family or members of the community, or coercing them not to practice their own religion, for example. So those more nuanced forms of violence are now recognised by the various acts in Australia as being acts of family violence.
More like psychological type of violence.
It certainly can be psychological or emotional coercion and control, as well as the physical abuse. And it can be things too, like it can involve damaging somebody's property, for example, destroying items that are important to them or of sentimental value, or injuring their pets, like their dog or their cat. That can also be family violence, because in those ways that person is trying to exercise control over the other person to get the sort of outcome that they want, to get the behaviour that they want, to force their will upon that person. So
the key word here would be control.
Exactly, yes. And the governments in Australia at the moment are also looking at changing the Act to include a definition of coercive control, which is even a more subtle form of behaviour. It's quite an insidious form of violence, where someone will try to control someone through repeated acts of a certain type of behaviour, or by, derogatory taunts about them, putting them down, condescending statements, or stalking, not allowing them to have their freedom. So the definition has broadened over the years, and the governments are looking at broadening it even further.
Perfect. Now let's talk about the domestic violence or family violence in specific in migrant communities.
Yes.
What do you think it's like? It would be, especially in a multicultural family, where we see Australian citizens exercising this type of coercive control
Yes.
on their spouses that are migrants, and maybe they are not here like fully with all the rights that they might have, like they have a partner visa, or the kind of like legal immigration status is not not very.
Yes. So you're talking about a power imbalance.
Exactly.
Yes.
There's a power imbalance, and so how does this affect so domestic violence or family violence in this situation?
I think that people in that situation are probably feeling more vulnerable anyway because of that power imbalance, and because they're in a situation where they feel like they haven't got their usual community, or where they can't speak the language properly, they can't reach out and perhaps speak to members of the family as they would in their home country. So because they are feeling more vulnerable, it's often more difficult for them to reach out and seek help in a situation where they are experiencing some of that behaviour that we discussed earlier, some of those family violence behaviours. There are support systems in place to try to help people from those communities and to help them overcome the language barriers. And it's important that there's some type of communication with people who are in that situation. So this podcast today is really important, for that reason, just to get the message out there, so that people who are feeling more vulnerable, new migrants, etc., do know where to go for some help, or do know that they can speak to someone and ask for some assistance.
For help.
But yes, I agree with you. People in that situation can often be they're more vulnerable to being exposed to family violence because they feel they haven't got the ability to look after themselves in the same way as they would in their home country. And sometimes there are also, like cultural issues too. They might feel shame. They don't want to admit that they've come all the way to Australia from overseas, and suddenly their relationship's not working out. So trained family lawyers and also people in the family violence space will understand that if they do reach out to speak to them.
Yeah, because it's true that family violence doesn't happen specifically in certain communities, or it kind of goes across the board.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't matter the level of education.
That's right. Yes.
Income, anything.
Yes.
Like it's amazing how it's very widespread.
It is.
So this is an important thing.
Yes.
So what would be the advice for somebody in this situation where, for example, they have they're on a partner visa, and they are victims of family violence, and they're afraid of reaching out because maybe they think, oh, I'm gonna lose my ability to stay in the country.
Yes.
Maybe they have already kids here that are Australian citizens. What is the advice for those people?
Well, they need to obtain some legal advice. That's very important, so that they understand, where they stand in the situation. They can get that advice from either a family lawyer or from a migration lawyer, who can also give them that advice, because there is a provision in the Migration Act which talks about family violence and talks about if somebody is experiencing family violence, how this will affect their situation in terms of remaining in the country. So they shouldn't just assume that their visa will be revoked or whatever if they want to separate from the perpetrator of violence. But it's extremely important that they do access either some legal advice, or at the initial stage, try to access some support from someone in the community who knows, where to point them to get some advice.
Correct. Okay. Yeah, perfect. So it's not to deter them So the fear of losing their immigration status or visa shouldn't deter them to come forth and seek help.
No, it shouldn't deter them. It shouldn't deter them from getting confidential advice if they can, and then that will inform them and help them to make the big decisions that they have to make about whether they're going to stay in that relationship or whether they might try to propose some counselling, couples counselling to their partner, or whether they are going to flee the relationship with the children. So they are really, really big decisions.
Yeah.
And before making that sort of a decision, they should definitely try to reach out to get some advice about what the consequences would be for them before they do it.
Yeah. And what we tell our community, the Mexican community here in Australia, is always to contact the embassy, because the embassy has consular section that deals with protection and legal affairs issues.
Yes.
So do contact the embassy if you don't know who to contact on the first step, and we'll direct these people to the appropriate either immigration lawyers or family lawyers or organizations as well.
Yeah, well, that's a great service that you have, Santiago.
Yeah, thank you. We do it. It's like across the world, all the consulates across the whole globe. We have that. It's very important for us to be able to protect our citizens abroad. So it's something that we are very keen on keep on doing.
Yes, but with the language barrier as well. And the lack of understanding of the local laws, it's even more important to have that service available. So
and this is why we're doing this podcast as well, to get the information out there, and I mean with specialists as you are. Now let's talk about the impact on the whole family. So the impact on children that are part of this environment of family violence. How does it affect children? And where in cases where children are involved, what are the long-term effects of that they can experience?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because earlier when we were talking about the definition at law of family violence, one of the parts of the definition talks about children being exposed to family violence. So it is actually considered to be an act of family violence to expose your children to family violence. So if, for example, someone is being abusive towards their partner and the children witness that, or if the children have to, for example, clean up mess afterwards, if plates are broken or that sort of thing, or if a dog is injured, or if children see police coming to the house, then that exposure to family violence is considered to be an act of family violence. And the family courts in Australia regard that very seriously and take that into account if they're making any domestic orders about family law. And certainly the police also will take that into account when they attend to, attend a situation where there has been family violence.
Yeah, because the children then are victims as well.
Exactly.
Not physically, but because of they're witnessing the violence against one of their parents or something, so they become victims.
They do
in their own right.
That's right. So both the children and the victim themselves will have remedies at law, and we can talk about that a little later in terms of a restraining order. But also the family court would regard that kind of behaviour very seriously if that evidence was put before the court. And in terms of the psychological impact on children, social science research has clearly established that children who witness family violence do suffer quite serious psychological trauma as a result of that. And they carry that with them. And their studies at school can be affected. They can simply not be capable of applying themselves to their study because they are consumed with the anxiety and concerns about the trauma that they are experiencing at home. So the effect on children can be long term. It can come out years later, even in the teenage years. It shouldn't be underestimated what the effect on children is of experiencing or witnessing family violence in a home.
Now, so I know that you're not a psychologist, but there's avenues as well. When there's a case of family violence, I'm guessing there's the legal aspect, but there's also the psychological part. And when you have a case of family violence, you'll direct them as well to have I don't know, some kind of therapy and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, and psychological support is very important in that situation because people can, sometimes people in situations of family violence don't even understand that they are in a situation of family violence. And it's only after talking to other people that they realise that this behaviour that's happening is not acceptable behaviour and is not normal behaviour. So accessing psychological support as well as the legal advice is extremely important.
Very important. Yeah. Now, in this context where we have multicultural families, and sometimes the victims will think, I'm just gonna flee the country, take my kids to not, have them in this terrible situation, and maybe they even have bad advice that says just leave your partner, go back to your country, take your kids, and you'll be out of that situation. But we in the embassy, we don't encourage this behavior. And can you talk through us about like what's happening here and what will be the repercussions?
Yes, well, I've been practicing family law for quite a few decades, and I can understand how people do in that situation want to flee and they want to go back to their home country where they're going to feel more secure and they're looked after by their family and they understand the laws and where they stand.
And they speak the language as well.
So I can certainly understand that temptation. But as you have said, it's not something that people should do, principally because Mexico is a signatory to the Hague Convention, which means that the perpetrator, for example, you gave the example of an Australian citizen earlier, the Australian citizen or the perpetrator can access legal assistance, free legal assistance through the Attorney General's Department, and the government in Australia can then take steps to invoke the Mexican courts to make orders to return the children to Australia. So the situation can actually become a lot more complicated for the victim, who then finds that they are at the receiving end of court documents. That creates even more confusion for them. It will be traumatic and expensive for them, and suddenly they will feel as though they have committed something that is they'll feel like they're in the wrong for having done something, whereas in fact the perpetrator in Australia has been the person who has been in the wrong. So we would advise against that. And if they do want to relocate, for example, their children back to their home country, for example, Mexico, they can take steps in Australia to get an order from the local family law courts to permit them to do that.
And it would have to be, getting like full custody, I imagine.
Yes.
And then with the full custody and maybe no visitation rights, then they can actually leave the country.
Yes. Well, we now call custody a lives with order. So they would need to seek a lives with order.
Okay.
There could also be the possibility for the perpetrator to see the children, to visit Mexico, or for the children to come out here and visit the perpetrator. But the important thing is for the person who's the victim of abuse to remember that they can access that justice through our local court system and can apply for permission to go. And once they have that permission to go, they can leave with the children.
Yeah, so exactly. The important thing then is to get the court...
Get the advice, get the legal advice, access some kind of support. As you said, reaching out to the embassy would be a fantastic first step. You know, it would be confidential, I assume, and you would ensure that the person was, of course, in a safe space when they spoke to you. And then from there, they can access the legal advice or the psychological support.
Yeah, and as I said, it's just something that it's very important for us. We tell our nationals not to up and leave the country because they go from being victims of domestic violence to being the perpetrators of international child abduction. Indeed. Which is very complicated. As you said, the perpetrator of the violence here could then request the court system and the Hague, like let's say the international court system, to return the children back to Australia, which is very complicated and then as well very expensive, as you said before. So
you've made that point very well.
Very important to not just up and leave the country before they have all the legal permits, let's say, to live with the children. Of course, if they are by themselves, if they don't have children, it's a lot easier. They can just leave the relationship, leave the country. They're adults and they can do anything. But yeah, it's just with the children, then it gets very, very difficult.
It does. And in fact, if there is an order in place from our local domestic family law courts, it's actually a criminal offence to leave the country with the children without the permission of the other partner or without the permission of the court. So they could be making the situation for themselves far more complicated and far more difficult. There could also be consequences for their visa. Their visa, if they left the country, could be cancelled, or the children's, if the children are not Australian citizens, could also be cancelled. I did have a case like that, not involving Mexico, but involving one of the states in the US, where a mother fled with a child, and there were consequences in terms of the visa status. So it's also important to take that into consideration before making those rash decisions, even though it might be very tempting to try to escape the situation.
What kind of you said, like, if there's an order, what kind of order would that be? Like
we call it a parenting order, so a custody order or a spend time with order, something like that. So if the family law court here has been involved with this family at all in the past and made some orders about visitation, or something like that, and the mother just said, or the father or the partner said, I don't care, I'm going, and ignored that order, then it's a criminal offence under the Family Law Act to go without permission.
So again, for the people that are listening, there are avenues to legally solve the domestic violence or family violence cases, but leaving the country without proper permission is never advised.
Yes.
Perfect. Now let's talk a little bit about, as I'm gonna call it, maybe it's not the correct wording, but gender neutrality in family violence.
Yes.
We were talking in the beginning of the very conventional husband and wife situation, but then we have other types of partnerships, maybe same-sex partnerships, and we also have the cases where it's the men is the victim of the domestic violence, and the woman is the perpetrator.
Yes, absolutely. The statistics are lower, but certainly there are men in Australia who are victims of family violence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how does that because I think there might be some taboos. I know it's lower statistically, but there might be also taboos for men that might think, oh yeah, if I consider myself a victim of family violence, then they kind of like lose their masculinity or something. They might feel exactly, and that might actually impede or deter them to come forward.
Indeed.
And so
true.
what is the implications that we see from here?
Well, it's important again in that situation for that person to reach out to your contact at the embassy and get some initial advice about where they stand. That first step is very important, and it's confidential for them. They don't have to act on the advice that they receive, but it will inform them about perhaps what they're experiencing, help them understand what they're experiencing, and help them to understand that it's not a sign of weakness to be concerned about experiencing inappropriate behaviour in the household.
Yeah, empowerment matters. That's the name of our podcast, and it is true. Like seeking the advice, having the information. As you said, you don't have to act on it, but at least having the information, and it's of course there's lots of implications. Difficult decisions to be made, but at least having the information, and that's where we come in.
That's a perfect choice of word, empowerment. So giving people choice and options is empowering them, and that will help them to dispel that sense of helplessness and hopelessness in that situation that you can feel when you're a victim.
Do you know if there's specific resources or support services tailored to same-sex partnerships that are experiencing family violence?
Yes, there certainly is. And in fact, statistically, people who are in LGBTIQ+ relationships can, the statistics show that they fall victim to family violence at even higher rates than those members of our heterosexual members of our community. And there are supports available in Canberra for people in the LGBTQI+ community. I can give you the links that perhaps you could.
Yeah, we can have them in the description.
Yes. One springs to mind, which is Meridian at Havelock House. And there are also other organisations who can assist, and there's certainly no kind of judgment or discrimination about members of that community. We have support services in Canberra that welcome and are inclusive and embrace diversity. So people in that situation shouldn't feel that they can't access support and help.
Perfect. Now, kind of like the own conversation is leading us to this next part that is very important, and is seeking help and the legal protections. So once we've recognized that we are in a situation of family violence, what are the legal avenues? What are the resources that we can find to support us?
Yeah, okay. Well, if a victim is still in their home and they haven't, for example, made contact with the embassy, then there are some hotlines that they can contact as well that are 24-hour hotlines, because the embassy is not open 24 hours. They can also contact the police by dialing 000 if they need to take, some immediate action. And the police will attend and assess the situation with a specialist family, often with a specialist family violence unit these days, and officers who are trained to recognise the signs of family violence. But the legal remedies that are available to them, to answer your question, Santiago, is that they can obtain a restraining order, which is called a family violence protection order, which can be made by our local court, our local magistrates court. And the application for that order is initially made with the perpetrator not present.
Okay.
So there's an application that is made in the absence of the other party, and the victim needs to satisfy the magistrate that such an order is justified based on a statement given by the victim, and the victim can also be asked to give some oral evidence in the witness box to the magistrate to just, back up what they say in their statement. So
what kind of evidence do they have to provide?
Okay. They have to provide a written statement generally about the sorts of behaviour that they have been experiencing in the home with dates, general dates. It can be a really specific date like 11 October 2023, or it can be a more general date such as I recall an incident in summer of 2022. But it has to try to pinpoint when it happened, and it has to describe what happened and how they felt, because the test is that this behaviour causes that person to feel afraid for their personal safety or that of their children. So that's the sort of evidence that is given. There are legal aid solicitors available at the magistrates court. The legal aid solicitors have access to translation services if necessary, if the person needs some assistance with that. And so that statement is then drawn up by either the person themselves or by the legal aid solicitor, and the application is made in the courtroom. That's the system we have operating in the ACT.
Okay.
In very serious cases, the police themselves can make that application on behalf of the victim. In New South Wales, as a matter of interest, and in some of the other states, it's more common for the police to make the application in the first instance than the victim.
Okay.
But in Canberra, it's generally the victim themselves, the alleged victim, who will make such an application. So turning their mind to what kind of experience, what kind of behaviour they've experienced is important, even though it might be very unpleasant for them to recall that.
And this, so doing these services, they're free, they're expensive.
Yes.
They just
the legal aid service at the magistrates court is a free service for the initial application for a family violence order, and the consequence of that restraining order most of the time is that the alleged perpetrator is ordered to leave the home.
Okay.
And not to come within, generally not to come within 100 metres of that person, not to contact the person, not to commit any family violence against them, not to harass them, not to cause any other person to do so. So that order will be made in the absence of the alleged perpetrator. The police will serve that restraining order on the perpetrator, and then the matter will go back to court. And it'll go back to court probably about 6 weeks later, and there will be a mediation initially, a kind of, we call it a return conference.
Okay.
And the perpetrator is asked whether or not they will agree to that order or not. And if they don't, and they are defending the order, then there is a trial date that is set down generally some weeks or months later.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the process for what we would call an intervention. That's an intervention by the state.
Okay.
To stop something happening that should not be happening. What can also sometimes happen is that the Director General of Child Welfare Services can step in extremely serious situations and remove the children from the care of both the mother and the father. But that only happens in very serious situations where, say, neither of the parents are taking action to protect the children.
Okay, and then they would go into the system and be taken care of
Yes.
by the state or territory.
Yes, but generally by another family member. Certainly the department will take steps to speak to both of the parents or the kin, other family members, to see what sort of a solution can be reached.
Now, if the victim decides to leave the house, are there any shelters or places they can go if they don't have that, like community support that they might, lack because they're in a different country? Are there any shelters that can provide some help?
Yes, there certainly are in Canberra. And they were originally set up in Canberra. The first one, I think, was in the late 80s in Canberra. And at your embassy, well, I can send you some information that you could put on your website, but the Domestic Violence Crisis Service is a specialist service that is funded by the ACT government. People can, if they can access it safely, can access that website from their home and then call them on their hotline to speak to them about how they can get out of the situation they're in. And then the Domestic Violence Crisis Service can make contact with the refuges and organise a safe place for them to go if they decide they really have to get out and they have to flee the home.
Is this only an ACT resource, or is there something
it's
nationwide?
It's nationwide generally.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Nationwide.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
We'll put the number there as well, so that people can access it.
Yeah.
Just another thing as well, just to clarify, because we at the embassy we do have an emergency phone number. That it's 24/7, and the consul will answer their questions and guide them through any process. But of course, as you said, if there is like an imminent dangerous situation, don't call the embassy, call the police.
That's right.
And yeah, so 000 is the number that people have to remember the most. And then we can guide them, but it's not going to be we're not going to be able to do anything at the moment. So we do ask people to call the police if their life or integrity is in danger, and then we can sort other things out afterwards with the embassy and with the other resources.
Indeed.
Perfect. Now, what happens? I think that, like we've talked. This has been a very, very interesting and important conversation. But sometimes, what happens when I am a witness of somebody being part of family violence, and for any reason they feel like they can't, or they just don't want to leave that relationship. There's this like, oh no, he's gonna change or she's gonna change mindset, and they'll stay and they'll stay and they'll stay till it's like maybe too late. What can we do as somebody, like a friend or family member of somebody facing family violence, to help them?
Well, there's only so much you can do. I mean, ultimately, the decision is up to that individual. So I think personally it's important to keep a dialogue open with them and to help them to increase their awareness of what the situation is that they are experiencing, and or that their children also might be experiencing. Asking open-ended questions, for example, like, do you have any worries at the moment, or do you have any concerns at the moment, or do you have any reason to feel that your safety, might be threatened? I think asking those sorts of open-ended questions are important to get that dialogue going, but also letting them know in that conversation that there is help out there for them if they want to seek that help, and that taking that first step to get advice, as we discussed earlier, advice from lawyers, family lawyers, migration lawyers, or psychologists, is really important to empower them to be able to make sensible decisions for themselves and for their children going forward. So I think if you do see friends or relatives or members of the community who are experiencing that, of course you can't force them to do something that they don't want to do because this is a free country. You could report it if you wanted, if you felt so compelled. You could try to take matters into your own hands and report it to the police. You could also, if the children were you thought the children were at risk of harm, you can call the CYPS, which is the government organisation I mentioned earlier, which will have a look and do a child welfare safety check if you feel the children are experiencing violence and neither parent is doing anything about it. But if you don't want to take that step of either calling the police yourself or calling the Child Protection Services,
is it anonymous
yourself,
or?
Well, what happens is that the police will ask for your name and address, and they will record it. Also, CYPS, the Child Protective Service, Child and Youth Protective Service will also record your name and address. But if those documents are ever subpoenaed later on by the alleged perpetrator, the police and the CYPS will redact the details of the reporter. So you can't leave a completely anonymous, I mean, you can try, but it won't have, police probably won't act on it. They will normally want to verify the information that they're receiving. I mean, there's also Crime Stoppers as well, which the AFP have the number for, where people can just ring up and say, I've witnessed a crime. They can leave that anonymously, and then it's up to the police to investigate if someone feels they have witnessed a crime of some sort.
Is there any type of people, I'm guessing, people, school teachers and the people that work with the children, are they, if they see that there's the children are in this situation of family violence, do they have to? Is it like is compulsory for them to do that or to report it? Yeah.
Yes, there are certain professions and allied health workers in the ACT and in other states and territories who are called mandatory reporters. So if they do see a situation where they think the children are experiencing violence, they will report it to the organisation I mentioned earlier, the CYPS.
Okay.
And I'm talking about people like your GP, the doctor, the teacher, as you mentioned, a psychologist who someone might go and see and talk about it. So, but if someone is a mandatory reporter, normally they will tell the person before they have the conversation that they are a mandatory reporter. And so if they do hear something that concerns them about the welfare of the child or children, that they have a duty to make a report about it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, perfect. Now we're coming to an end of our conversation. Thank you again very much. Is there anything else that you would like to add to this conversation, something that we might have missed?
Well, I think that it's a wonderful initiative that the Embassy is showing in reaching out to help your citizens nationally in this way, and it's a really important service. So, well done to you for doing that.
Thank you.
I also think that if there are people out there who are feeling vulnerable or afraid, or who are in a situation where they're confused and don't know what to do, they shouldn't feel shame or fault. It's not their fault that they're experiencing this situation, and reaching out and getting some help is the most important thing that they could do. The organisations that are out there that can help them will keep their inquiry confidential, and also are, quite attuned to ensuring that that person remains safe while they are giving their report or telling their concerns to that organisation.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Because otherwise it might escalate.
Indeed.
And we don't want that to happen.
No.
Where can people that are seeing this podcast find your information if they wanted to contact you in the future for seeking help and legal advice?
Okay, well, we're in the city in Canberra, so we are just off University Avenue in Hobart Place, in a building called the AMP building, and we're on level 9. They can call and speak to one of our solicitors for 15 minutes free consultation, and our number is 5114-2660. They don't have to be in Canberra to do that. We accept calls from, we have national clients and also international clients. Alternatively, we can set up a Zoom consultation, and we have after hours Zoom as well called Lounge Room Lawyer. We also do consultations during lunchtime as well. That can either be on the telephone or by Zoom. So we're pretty easy to reach. Our website is parkercolescurtis.com.au.
Perfect.
And you can have clients can have a look at that and see whether there's a service there that they think can assist them.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for shedding light into this very, very important topic, and for being part of our first podcast, Empowerment Matters. And I want to remind everybody that if they are in a family violence situation, to do reach out, seek help, seek information, and then make the decisions that you have to make.
Yeah. Well, thank you very
Perfect.
much for having me.
Thank you so much.